The January wind cut through Atlanta like a knife, and Asha Monroe pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. The church steps where she'd been sleeping for the past week were no longer an option. A chain and padlock now secured the heavy wooden doors, and a closed for renovations sign had been posted just that morning. "I'm sorry, honey," Father Matthews had told her earlier. "The diocese made the decision. I fought it, but they want to turn this place into condos." Asha nodded without meeting his eyes. She was used to disappointment. At 26, she had already experienced enough hardship for several lifetimes. "I've got some contacts at the women's shelter on Peachtree," the priest offered, pressing a crumpled business card into her hand. "Tell them I sent you." "Thank you," she whispered, tucking the card into her pocket. But they both knew the shelters were overcrowded, especially during winter. Now, as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Asha walked aimlessly through streets that grew increasingly unfamiliar. She'd never ventured into this wealthy neighborhood before, the hills that overlooked the city, where massive homes sat behind iron gates. Her old Honda Civic, which had served as both transportation and shelter for nearly a year, had finally died 2 weeks ago. She'd been forced to sell it for parts, and that money was long gone now. A harsh gust of wind sent her stumbling. Her worn-out boots slipped on a patch of ice, and Asha found herself on her hands and knees on the sidewalk, her small backpack containing everything she owned, spilling open. Tears stung her eyes as she gathered her few possessions: a toothbrush, a frayed sketchbook, a small framed photo of her mother and sister, a change of clothes. Once, she'd been a college student with dreams of becoming an art therapist. That was before her mother's sudden death from an aneurysm, and before the state had taken her 14-year-old sister, Zora, into foster care. One tragedy had led to another. She'd dropped out of college to try to gain custody of Zora, but without a stable income or housing, her case had been denied. Then came the eviction, the job losses, and finally the streets. The cold was becoming unbearable. Her fingers were numb as she zipped her backpack closed. She needed to find shelter before hypothermia set in. Asha squinted through the darkness at a large iron gate ahead. Behind it stood a mansion unlike any she'd ever seen, modern with glass walls that revealed a minimalist interior bathed in soft light. The driveway curved upward, disappearing behind perfectly manicured hedges. At the gate was an intercom system. Asha hesitated. She wasn't a beggar. She had never asked for handouts, but tonight might kill her if she didn't find somewhere warm. With a trembling finger, she pressed the intercom button. Dominic Hale was reviewing acquisition contracts in his home office when the security alert chimed. He frowned, glancing at his watch. It was nearly midnight. No one ever came to his gate, especially not at this hour. He pulled up the security camera feed on his tablet and saw a figure huddled at his gate. Small, wrapped in layers of clothing, head bowed. Probably someone looking for a handout. Dominic almost ignored it. He had built his real estate empire by being ruthlessly focused and avoiding distractions. At 32, he was one of Atlanta's wealthiest bachelors, though he shunned the spotlight and rarely appeared at social functions. His employees knew him as cold, demanding, and brilliant. Few people knew anything about his past or personal life, which was exactly how he preferred it. The figure at the gate pressed the intercom again, and something made Dominic hit the answer button. "This is private property," he said sharply. There was a pause, then a soft female voice. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I just need—" The voice broke, then steadied. "I need a place to stay warm for a few hours. There's a storm coming. I can sit in your garage or shed. I won't touch anything. I'll be gone by morning." Dominic's jaw tightened. He was about to refuse when a particularly strong gust of wind hit the house, rattling the windows. The weather alert on his phone had warned of record-low temperatures tonight. "Wait there," he said abruptly, then cut the connection. He shouldn't do this. Every instinct told him to call security or the police, but something in that voice, the quiet dignity in it, had caught him off guard. Dominic grabbed his coat and made his way down to the gate. As he approached, he saw the figure more clearly. It was a young woman, her face mostly hidden by a scarf. She was shivering violently. He hesitated only briefly before pressing the code to open the gate. "Come in," he said, maintaining his distance. "You can warm up in the kitchen." She looked up, and for the first time he saw her eyes, large, dark, and filled with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. She didn't move immediately. "I'm not going to hurt you," Dominic said, his voice softer than he intended. "But you might freeze to death out here." She nodded almost imperceptibly and stepped through the gate, keeping a careful distance from him as they walked up the long driveway to the house. Inside, the contrast between the bitter cold and the warmth of the mansion seemed to overwhelm her. She swayed slightly in the entryway, her eyes widening as she took in the soaring ceilings and minimalist decor. "The kitchen is this way," Dominic said, leading her through the house. He noticed she was careful not to touch anything, keeping her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, was sleek and modern, all stainless steel and white marble. Dominic gestured to one of the stools at the island. "Sit," he said, then turned to the refrigerator. "When did you last eat?" She hesitated before answering. "Yesterday morning." Dominic felt an unexpected surge of something. Anger? Concern? He wasn't sure. He began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "I'm making soup," he announced, setting a pot on the stove. "It'll warm you up." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted, his back to her as he worked. "I want to." A silence fell between them as he chopped vegetables and set the soup to simmer. Finally, he turned to face her. "What's your name?" She had lowered her scarf, revealing more of her face, though she kept her coat on. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, he could see she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and full lips. "Asha," she said softly. "Asha Monroe." "Dominic Hale." Her eyes flicked up to his face briefly. "Thank you for letting me in, Mr. Hale." "Dominic," he corrected automatically. Asha nodded but didn't repeat his name. Her hands, now exposed, were red and chapped from the cold. She noticed him looking and quickly tucked them into her sleeves. The soup finished cooking, and Dominic placed a steaming bowl in front of her, along with a piece of crusty bread. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, giving her space. Asha ate slowly, carefully, as if savoring every spoonful. Dominic found himself watching the way her shoulders gradually relaxed as the warmth of the food spread through her. "There's a guest room upstairs," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "You can stay tonight. Leave in the morning." Asha's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Dominic replied, his voice firm. "It's 15 degrees outside with a wind chill making it feel like 0. No one should be out in that." She finished her soup in silence, then looked up at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question, one Dominic wasn't sure he could answer. He had spent years building walls around himself, focusing solely on growing his business empire. He didn't let people in, he didn't get involved. "Does it matter?" he asked instead of answering. Asha studied him for a long moment, then shook her head slightly. "I guess not." Dominic showed her to the guest bathroom, where he left her with a stack of towels and a new toothbrush, still in its packaging. "There's a shower," he said, pointing. "Hot water will help with the cold. I'll find you something to sleep in." He left before she could respond, closing the door behind him. In his bedroom, he rummaged through his drawers until he found a t-shirt and sweatpants that might fit her small frame. He left them outside the bathroom door with a soft knock to let her know they were there. Back in the kitchen, Dominic poured himself a glass of whiskey and tried to make sense of his actions. He didn't know this woman. She could be anyone. A drug addict, a criminal, mentally unstable. Yet something in her eyes had reached past his defenses, stirring memories he'd worked hard to bury. The sound of the shower running echoed faintly through the house. Dominic closed his eyes, remembering another time, another place. A small apartment in South Atlanta, his mother working 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed. The nights when the heat was turned off because they couldn't pay the bill, he had clawed his way out of poverty through sheer determination and a ruthless focus on success. Along the way, he'd learned to shut down his emotions, to see people as either assets or liabilities. It had served him well in business. So why had he let this stranger into his home? The shower stopped. Dominic opened his eyes and drained his glass. Whatever his reasons, he had committed to one night. Tomorrow she would leave, and his life would return to its carefully ordered routine. Asha stood in the marble bathroom, steam curling around her. The shower had been almost painfully wonderful, hot water sluicing away weeks of grime and, temporarily at least, the bone-deep chill she had been carrying. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and froze. She hadn't seen her reflection clearly in months. The face that stared back at her was thinner than she remembered, with shadows under the eyes, but it was still her, still Asha Monroe, the girl who had once had plans and dreams. The clothes Dominic had left were ridiculously large on her, but they were clean and soft. She had to roll the waistband of the sweatpants several times to keep them from falling off, and the t-shirt hung to her knees. Her own clothes were filthy, but she carefully folded them anyway. They were all she had. Taking a deep breath, Asha opened the bathroom door. The house was quiet. She padded softly down the hallway, following the faint light coming from the kitchen. Dominic was still there, standing by the window, looking out at the night. He turned when she entered, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. Asha was suddenly aware of how exposed she felt without her layers, without the dirt and oversized clothing that had become a kind of armor. She resisted the urge to cross her arms over her chest. "The guest room is this way," Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral as he led her up the stairs. The bedroom was like something from a magazine, a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a plush carpet that felt like heaven under her bare feet. "Thank you," Asha said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "This is very kind of you." Dominic nodded stiffly. "There's a lock on the door," he said, pointing to it. If you'd feel safer." The implication was clear. She could lock him out. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Asha felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Good night, Asha," he said, already turning to leave. "Good night, Dominic," she replied, his name feeling strange on her lips. After he left, Asha did lock the door, not because she feared him exactly, but because old habits died hard. Then she approached the bed cautiously, as if it might disappear. When she finally slipped between the sheets, the softness enveloped her like a cloud. For the first time in years, Asha slept through the night. Morning light filtered through the windows, waking Asha gently. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the church closing, the desperate walk in the cold, the intercom at the gate, Dominic Hale and his glass mansion on the hill. She sat up, running a hand through her curls, which had dried into a halo around her head overnight. Today she would leave, find her way back downtown, try the shelter Father Matthews had recommended. But first, she needed to thank the strange, aloof man who had given her shelter for the night. After using the bathroom and changing back into her own clothes, now completely dry but still dirty, Asha made her way downstairs. The smell of coffee guided her to the kitchen. Dominic was there, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than a year's rent at her old apartment. He was typing rapidly on a laptop, a cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing to the pot, "and food in the refrigerator. Help yourself." "Thank you, but I should be going," Asha replied, although the thought of hot coffee made her mouth water. "You've already done more than enough." Dominic closed his laptop. "It's still below freezing outside." "I'll be fine," she said, even though they both knew it wasn't true. He studied her for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Asha immediately stiffened. "I don't want your money." "You need somewhere to stay," Dominic said, ignoring her protest as he counted out several $100 bills. "This will get you a hotel room for a few days until you figure things out." Asha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I told you I don't want charity." "It's not charity," he said, his voice hardening. "It's practicality. You need help." "You don't know anything about me or what I need," Asha said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you for last night. I'm leaving now." She turned and walked toward the front door, her heart pounding. She had her pride. It was often all she had, and she wouldn't let this wealthy stranger buy his way out of whatever guilt or pity had prompted him to help her. "Asha, wait," Dominic called, following her. "Don't be stubborn, it's freezing out there." She reached the front door and turned to face him. "I've survived worse." Something shifted in his expression. A flash of frustration, quickly replaced by a more calculated look. "I have a proposal," he said abruptly. "Stay here, not just for today, but for the winter. I have more space than I need, and you need somewhere to get back on your feet." Asha stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to move in? With a complete stranger?" "It's a business arrangement," Dominic clarified, his tone becoming more professional. "You need housing. I could use some help around the house. My housekeeper only comes twice a week, and there are things that fall through the cracks." "You want me to be your maid?" Asha asked incredulously. "I want to offer you a job and a place to stay," Dominic replied evenly. "You'd have your own space. The guest house out back is fully furnished. You'd be completely independent." Asha shook her head, her hand on the doorknob. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. I could be anyone." Dominic's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Let's just say I recognize determination when I see it. You're not looking for a handout. You're looking for a chance." Asha's grip on the doorknob loosened slightly. He wasn't wrong, but still the offer seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, if something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. "No catch," Dominic said. "You work, you stay. When spring comes, you can leave if you want. No strings attached." Asha hesitated. The practical part of her brain screamed that this was her best option. Maybe her only option if she wanted to avoid the streets or the overcrowded shelters. But the part of her that had been hurt and disappointed too many times urged caution. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Dominic nodded. "Take the day. Stay warm. Get some rest. We can talk again this evening." Asha reluctantly agreed, and Dominic showed her to the guest house, a small but elegant structure behind the main house. Like the mansion, it featured large windows and modern furnishings, but it felt more intimate, less austere. "Make yourself at home," Dominic said, handing her a key. "I'll be working in my office all day. There's food in the refrigerator here too." After he left, Asha explored the guest house. It had a small kitchen, a living area with a fireplace, a bedroom and a bathroom that, while not as luxurious as the one in the main house, was still nicer than any she'd used in years. She showered again, taking her time, letting the hot water ease the tension in her muscles. Then, wrapped in a soft robe she found hanging in the bathroom, she examined the refrigerator. It was fully stocked with fresh food, fruits, vegetables, eggs, cheese, bread. Asha made herself a simple sandwich, then curled up on the couch, watching the flames in the fireplace. The warmth and food made her drowsy, and soon she drifted off to sleep. When she woke, the winter sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the floor. Asha sat up, disoriented once again. It felt strange to be so comfortable, so safe after months of constant vigilance. She dressed in her own clothes, now feeling even more shabby and out of place in these elegant surroundings. Then, gathering her courage, she walked back to the main house to give Dominic her answer. He was in the kitchen again, this time stirring something on the stove that smelled delicious. He'd removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms. "I made dinner," he said without turning around. "Nothing fancy, just pasta." Asha stood in the doorway, watching him. In the fading light, with his guard down, he looked different, less intimidating, more human. "I've thought about your offer," she said quietly. Dominic turned to face her, his expression neutral. "And?" Asha took a deep breath. "I'll stay, on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "I don't want your money," she said firmly. "I'll work for room and board, that's it, and I want to be clear about what that work involves." A hint of a smile touched Dominic's lips. "Cleaning, cooking if you want, maybe some organizing. Nothing more." Asha nodded slowly. "Then we have a deal." "Good," Dominic said, turning back to the stove. "Dinner's ready. We can discuss the details while we eat." As they sat at the kitchen island, steam rising from their plates, Asha couldn't help but wonder what she had just agreed to. This man, this wealthy, reserved stranger, had upended her life in the span of 24 hours. But as she looked across at him, she saw something in his eyes that gave her pause. Behind the cool exterior was something else, something wounded and carefully hidden. She recognized it because she saw the same thing every time she looked in a mirror. They were both broken in different ways, both hiding behind carefully constructed walls. Little did Asha know that by agreeing to stay, she had set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. The winter stretched ahead of them, a season of cold and darkness, but also perhaps of unexpected warmth and light. As they ate in comfortable silence, the first snow of the season began to fall outside, covering Atlanta in a blanket of white, wiping away footprints and making everything look new again. 1 week had passed since Asha agreed to stay at Dominic's estate. The rhythm of their arrangement was beginning to take shape. Each morning, she would wake early, make coffee, and begin her work in the main house while Dominic was either working in his home office or attending meetings in the city. Today she was dusting the shelves in his study, a room she usually avoided when he was home. The walls were lined with books that looked like they had never been opened, and expensive art that seemed chosen more for its value than for any personal connection. As she worked, Asha found herself drawn to a small photograph partially hidden behind a stack of business magazines. She picked it up carefully. It showed a much younger Dominic, perhaps 16 or 17, standing beside a tired-looking woman with the same sharp jawline and intense eyes. His mother, Asha guessed. They were standing in front of a small apartment building. Nothing. Like the mansion where she now stood? "What are you doing?" Asha jumped at the sound of Dominic's voice. She hadn't heard him enter the room. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting the photograph back in its place. "I was just dusting." Dominic's expression was tight as he crossed the room and took the photograph, placing it face down in a drawer. "I prefer that my personal items not be touched," he said coldly. Asha felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "It won't happen again." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Dominic sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "I have a dinner meeting tonight," he said, changing the subject. "I won't be home until late." Asha nodded, relieved that he wasn't going to fire her on the spot. "I'll finish the downstairs. Today." Dominic watched her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and left the room without another word. Alone again, Asha released the breath she'd been holding. In the week she'd been here, she'd learned that Dominic was a complex man, generous in some ways, completely closed off in others. They rarely spoke beyond what was necessary, eating their meals separately and moving around each other like wary dancers. Yet there were moments, brief, unexpected flashes, when she caught glimpses of something else beneath his cool exterior. Like yesterday, when she'd been struggling to reach a high shelf and he'd suddenly appeared behind her, his tall frame easily extending to grab what she needed. Their hands had brushed, and for just a second, neither of them had pulled away. Asha shook her head, dismissing the memory. She was here to work, to get back on her feet. Nothing more. She couldn't afford to read anything into their interactions. That evening, with Dominic gone, Asha allowed herself the luxury of exploring the mansion more freely. She wandered through rooms she had cleaned but never really looked at. A formal dining room that seemed unused, a music room with a grand piano gathering dust, a home theater with plush leather seats. It was a beautiful house, but cold somehow. Impersonal. Like a museum rather than a home. In the kitchen, she found herself opening the refrigerator, taking stock of what was available. Before she quite realized what she was doing, she was chopping vegetables, measuring rice, preparing a stew that her mother had taught her to make, comfort food from her childhood. The familiar actions soothed her, bringing back memories of happier times, of her mother singing as she cooked, of Zora setting the table, of laughter around their small kitchen table. The thought of Zora sent a pang through her heart. Her little sister would be 16 now. 2 years had passed since the state had taken her away. 2 years of Asha fighting and failing to get her back, of watching her own life crumble until she could barely take care of herself, let alone prove she could care for a teenager. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the front door open. She only realized Dominic had returned when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie. "You're cooking," he said, sounding surprised. Asher glanced up, equally startled. I thought you had a dinner meeting. It ended early. His eyes moved from her face to the pot simmering on the stove. That smells good. It's my mother's recipe, Asher said without thinking. Chicken and vegetable stew with rice. There's plenty if you haven't eaten. Dominic hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. They ate at the kitchen island. The silence between them different than usual, less tense, almost comfortable. Dominic took a second helping without comment, and Asher felt an unexpected surge of pleasure at his obvious enjoyment of her cooking. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked after a while. The question surprised her. It was the most personal thing he'd asked since she arrived. My mother taught me, she answered, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. She worked long hours as a nurse, so I started helping with meals when I was pretty young. Dominic nodded, his eyes on his plate. My mother worked 3 jobs. We ate a lot of fast food. The casual revelation of this small piece of his past caught Asher off guard. She looked up at him, but his expression gave nothing away. Is she still alive? Your mother? She asked cautiously. Dominic shook his head. She died when I was 20. Cancer. I'm sorry, Asher said softly. Mine died 2 years ago. Brain aneurysm. It was sudden. Their eyes met briefly, a silent recognition passing between them. The understanding that they shared this specific kind of loss. You had a sister, Dominic said. It wasn't a question. Asher tensed. How did you know that? The photograph in your backpack, the night you arrived. I saw it when you dropped your things. She had almost forgotten that moment. Kneeling on the icy sidewalk, gathering her scattered belongings. Of course he would have seen the photo of her mother and Zora that she kept carefully wrapped in a soft cloth. Her name is Zora, Asher said, quietly. She's 16 now. After our mother died, I tried to get custody, but she trailed off, the familiar sense of failure washing over her. The system isn't designed to make things easy, Dominic finished for her. Asher looked at him curiously. You sound like you know something about it. A shadow crossed his face. More than I'd like to. He didn't elaborate and Asher didn't push. Instead, they finished their meal in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, one filled with unspoken understanding rather than awkward tension. After dinner, Dominic insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Asher's protests that it was her job. They worked side by side at the sink, their arms occasionally brushing, each contact sending a small jolt through Asher that she tried to ignore. Thank you for dinner, Dominic said as they finished. It's been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal. You're welcome, Asher replied, avoiding his eyes. Good night, Dominic. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Asher. He paused, as if considering his words carefully. I'm sorry about this morning, about the photograph. She looked back at him, surprised by the apology. It's okay, I shouldn't have been looking at your personal things. No, it's... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of discomfort. The woman in that photo is my mother. It was taken right before I left for college. She was so proud. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. She should have been, Asher said softly. You've obviously done well for yourself. Dominic's laugh was without humor. I suppose I have, for all the good it did her. Before Asher could respond, he turned away. Good night, Asher. She watched him go, feeling that she had just glimpsed another crack in the careful facade he maintained. A brief look at the man behind the walls. The next few days brought a subtle shift in their relationship. They still maintained their separate routines, but there were more moments of interaction. Dominic began joining Asher for dinner regularly, though they rarely spoke of anything personal after that night. On a particularly cold Saturday morning, Asher was cleaning the living room windows when she noticed Dominic standing in the garden, staring out at the city below. Despite the freezing temperature, he wore only a light jacket, his breath forming clouds in the air. Without quite knowing why, Asher made 2 mugs of hot chocolate and carried them outside. You'll catch pneumonia, she said, approaching him cautiously. Dominic turned, surprise flashing across his face when he saw the steaming mugs. He accepted one with a nod of thanks. I like the cold, he said. It clears my head. Asha wrapped her hands around her mug, savoring the warmth. What needs clearing? He glanced at her, then back at the view. I'm considering a new development. Project Downtown, an old building that's been abandoned for years. Most of my advisors think I should tear it down, build luxury condos. But you don't want to, Asha guessed. Dominic's mouth quirked, in what might have been the beginning of a smile. How can you tell? You wouldn't be out here freezing if you were excited about it. He took a sip of his hot chocolate, considering her words. The building used to be a community center. Art classes, after-school programs, that sort of thing. It meant a lot to the neighborhood before it fell into disrepair. Asha felt a flicker of interest. What neighborhood? Summerhill, South Atlanta. I grew up near there, Asha said, surprised. The Rainbow Center. Dominic turned to her, his eyebrows raised. You know it. I took art classes there when I was a kid, Asha said, memories flooding back. Every Saturday morning. It was the highlight of my week. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. What would you do with it if it were up to you? The question caught her off guard. Me? I'm hardly a real estate developer. Humor me, he said, his dark eyes intent on her face. Asha looked out at the city, thinking, I'd restore it, make it a community center again. Art programs, job training, maybe even temporary housing for people getting back on their feet. She shook her head, embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. It's probably not very profitable, though. No, Dominic agreed. It's not. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the city spread below them. You were studying to be an art therapist, Dominic said suddenly. Asha stared at him. How did you know that? For a moment he looked almost embarrassed. I may have done some research after you arrived. You ran a background check on me? Asha wasn't sure whether to be offended or impressed. I let a stranger into my home, Dominic said defensively. It seemed prudent. Asha couldn't argue with that logic, though it made her uncomfortable to think of him digging into her past. Well, yes, I was studying art therapy before everything fell apart, Dominic nodded thoughtfully. There's a studio on the 3rd floor. Art supplies, easels, that sort of thing. My interior designer thought it would make the house more interesting. I've never used it. Asha blinked, trying to process this unexpected information. You have an art studio in your house? You're welcome to use it, Dominic said, his tone casual, though his eyes were watching her carefully. If you want. The offer took her breath away. It had been so long since she'd held a paintbrush, since she'd allowed herself the luxury of creating something. Thank you, she managed to say. I'd like that. Dominic nodded, finishing his hot chocolate. I have a meeting in the city. I'll be back for dinner. He walked past her toward the house, then paused. Asha, she turned to look at him. Yes? I'll show you the studio when I get back. True to his word, Dominic led Asha to the 3rd floor that evening. The studio was at the end of a hallway she had never explored. Behind a door she had assumed was another guest room. When he opened it, Asha couldn't suppress a gasp. The room was breathtaking. Large windows offering a panoramic view of the city, now twinkling with lights as darkness fell. Easels stood ready, shelves lined with every art supply imaginable, from expensive paints to charcoals to pastels. Large work table dominated the center of the room, its surface pristine. This is incredible, she breathed, moving into the space as if in a dream. Her fingers trailed over brushes, canvases, sketchbooks, all untouched, waiting. Dominic watched. Her from the doorway, his expression softening at her obvious delight. Consider it part of our arrangement. You can use it whenever you're not working. Asha turned to face him, overwhelmed by the gesture. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Dominic replied, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. Just use it. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a connection that made Asha's heart beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, but instead, he simply nodded and left her alone with the art supplies and the beautiful view. Asha spent hours in the studio that night, losing herself in the simple joy of creating again. She started with charcoal sketches, Nothing ambitious, just exercises to reacquaint her hands with the feel of drawing. But soon she found herself reaching for paints, colors flowing onto canvas in a way that felt like coming home. She didn't realize how late it had gotten until she heard a soft knock at the door. Dominic stood there, 2 mugs in his hands. "I thought you might want some tea," he said, offering her one of the mugs. "It's after midnight." Asha accepted the tea gratefully, suddenly aware of how tired her body was, though her mind still buzzed with creative energy. "I lost track of time," she admitted. "Thank you for this, Dominic, for all of it." He glanced at her canvas, a cityscape at night, lights glowing like stars against the darkness. "You're talented." The simple compliment warmed her more than the tea. "It's been so long since I painted. I'd almost forgotten how it feels." Dominic moved closer to examine the painting. "How does it feel?" "Like breathing," Asha said softly. "Like remembering who I am." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Asha felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Not as a homeless woman, not as a charity case, but as a person with value and gifts. "You should keep painting," Dominic said. "Every day if you want to." Asha nodded, unable to find words to express what his encouragement meant to her. "Good night, Asha," he said, turning to leave. "Good night, Dominic." After he left, Asha stayed a while longer, sipping her tea and looking out at the city. Somewhere out there was Zora, living with strangers. Somewhere out there was the life Asha had lost and was trying to rebuild. For the first time in a long time, it didn't seem impossible. As January gave way to February, a new pattern emerged in the big house on the hill. Asha continued her work, cleaning and occasionally cooking, but now she spent every free moment in the studio. Dominic seemed to find more reasons to work from home, often appearing in the doorway of the studio with coffee or questions about her latest project. They began to share more meals, their conversations gradually becoming less guarded. Asha learned that Dominic had put himself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, that he had built his real estate empire from nothing, beginning with a single run-down apartment building he had renovated himself. In turn, she told him about her childhood in South Atlanta, about her mother's dedication to her daughter's education, about her dreams of using art to help troubled kids like she had once been. One evening, as they sat in the living room with a fire crackling, in the fireplace, Dominic asked the question she had been dreading. "What happened after your mother died? How did you end up homeless?" Asha finished when he trailed off. She stared into the fire, gathering her thoughts. "It wasn't one thing. It was everything at once. The medical bills from my mother's final hospital stay, the rent increases, trying to fight for custody of Zora while working 2 jobs and still going to school." She took a deep breath. "I missed too many classes, lost my scholarship, then I lost one job, then the other. The eviction came next. For a while I stayed with friends, but eventually I ran out of couches to crash on." She shrugged, trying to make light of it. "I lived in my car for almost a year before it died on me." Dominic was silent, his face unreadable in the firelight. "The hardest part wasn't being homeless," Asha continued quietly. "It was knowing that every day that passed made it less likely I'd ever get Zora back. The system doesn't give second chances to people like me." "People like you?" Dominic repeated, his voice low. "Poor people. Black women without resources or connections." Asha's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You're wrong about second chances." Asha shook her head sadly. "Am I? The last time I was allowed to see Zora was 6 months ago. Her foster parents are talking about adoption. They're good people, stable, comfortable. They can give her things I never could." "Is that what Zora wants?" Dominic asked. The question hit Asha like a physical blow. "I don't know," she admitted. "We were close, but she was just 14 when Mom died. Maybe she's happy with her new family. Maybe she's forgotten about me." "I doubt that," Dominic said softly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, snow was falling again, covering the garden in a fresh white blanket. "Where is she now?" Dominic asked eventually. "Zora. Do you know where she's living?" Asha hesitated, then nodded. "North Atlanta, with the Braxtons. They have 2 other foster children, both younger than Zora." Dominic seemed to be considering something, his expression thoughtful. Before he could speak, Asha stood up abruptly. "It's getting late," she said. "I should go." Dominic rose as well, standing close enough that Asha could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Asha, thank you for listening," she interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever well-intentioned but ultimately empty reassurance he was about to offer. "Good night, Dominic." She fled to the guest house, her emotions in turmoil. Talking about Zora always left her raw, vulnerable, and there was something about the way Dominic had looked at her, with a mixture of compassion and something else, something that made her heart race, that scared her more than she wanted to admit. The next morning, Asha was surprised to find Dominic waiting for her in the kitchen. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, his usual business attire nowhere to be seen. "I'm taking the day off," he announced as she entered. "I thought we might go out." Asha blinked in confusion. "Out? There's an art exhibition at the High Museum. Contemporary African-American artists. I thought you might be interested." The offer was so unexpected that Asha didn't know how to respond. "You want to take me to an art museum?" Dominic shifted, looking almost uncomfortable. "If you'd rather—" No, Asha said quickly. "I'd love to go, I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a museum." Dominic's expression relaxed. "We can fix that. There's a shopping center on the way." An hour later, Asha found herself in an upscale boutique, feeling completely out of place as Dominic spoke quietly with a sales associate. The woman approached Asha with a warm smile and a selection of clothes in her size, simple but elegant pieces that Asha would never have been able to afford. "I can't let you buy these for me," she protested when Dominic pulled out his credit card. "Consider it a work expense," he replied calmly, "part of our arrangement." Before Asha could argue further, the sales associate was guiding her to a fitting room. The clothes fit perfectly. A pair of dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater in a deep burgundy, and a black wool coat that felt like being wrapped in a cloud. When she emerged, Dominic's eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful," he said, the words seeming to escape before he could stop them. Asha felt her cheeks warm. She had caught glimpses of herself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. With proper food and rest, her face had filled out, her skin glowing, her natural curls framing her face in a way that highlighted her features. "Thank you," she said softly. The museum was crowded, but Asha barely noticed the other visitors. She moved from piece to piece, completely absorbed in the artwork, occasionally stopping to explain techniques or share her thoughts with Dominic. He listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. When they came to a series of multimedia pieces addressing homelessness and displacement, Asha fell silent, her emotions too close to the surface. Dominic seemed to sense her discomfort. "Let's get some lunch," he suggested, gently guiding her away from the exhibit with a hand at the small of her back. They ate at the museum cafe, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed the art they had seen. Asha couldn't remember the last time she had felt so normal, so engaged with the world. "Thank you for this," she said, as they walked back to Dominic's car. "For all of it." He glanced down at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Asha." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "You've been so kind to me, and It's not kindness," Dominic interrupted, stopping to face her. "At first maybe it was, but now—" He trailed off, his eyes searching hers. Asha felt her heart begin to race. "Now what?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. For a moment, Asha thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took a small step back. "Now I enjoy your company," he said simply. "You make my house feel less empty." The admission, so plainly stated, touched Asha deeply. "I enjoy your company too," she said softly. They drove home in comfortable silence, both aware that something had shifted between them. A boundary crossed, a wall lowered. As they pulled into the driveway, Dominic's phone rang. He answered it with a frown, his expression darkening as he listened to the caller. "I understand," he said finally. "I'll be there in an hour." He ended the call and turned to Asha. "I'm sorry. There's an emergency with one of my properties downtown. A pipe burst, flooding several units. "Of course," Asha said, trying to hide her disappointment. "You should go." Dominic hesitated, then reached across the console to take her hand. His touch was warm, his fingers curling around hers with gentle pressure. "Thank you for today," he said, his eyes holding hers. "We'll do it again soon." Asha nodded, her voice failing her as emotions swirled through her chest. As she watched him drive away a few minutes later, after changing into his business clothes, she tried to make sense of what was happening between them. She had come to his gate, desperate and freezing, looking only for shelter from the cold. Somehow in the weeks since they had given each other so much more than that. Companionship, understanding, a safe place to lower their guards. But as Asha walked to the guest house, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. Dominic Hale lived in a different world. Eventually spring would come and their arrangement would end. She would leave, and he would continue his life as if she had never been there. Falling for him would be the most foolish thing she could do. Yet as she looked back at the mansion gleaming in the winter sunlight, Asha feared it might already be too late to protect her heart. February slipped into March, bringing slightly warmer days but still freezing nights. The snow that had blanketed Atlanta for weeks began to melt, revealing patches of green beneath. Signs of spring were appearing, subtle but unmistakable. Inside Dominic's mansion, another kind of thawing was taking place. The day at the museum had marked a turning point in his relationship with Asha. They no longer maintained the careful distance of employer and employee. Instead, they had fallen into a comfortable routine that felt increasingly like friendship, or perhaps something more. Asha still cleaned and cooked, but now Dominic insisted she join him for dinner every evening. They would talk about their days, discuss books or art, sometimes just sit in companionable silence. On weekends, they often ventured out together, to galleries, bookstores, or just for walks in the park as the weather improved. Asha's presence had transformed the cold, sterile mansion into something warmer, more inviting. Fresh flowers appeared. On tables, colorful throws draped over the stark furniture, and several of her paintings now hung on walls that had previously been bare. Most significantly, the art studio had become the heart of the house. Asha spent hours there each day, her confidence growing with each canvas she completed. Sometimes Dominic would join her, not to paint, but to work on his laptop, while she created, as if simply being in her presence brought him peace. It was in the studio on a rainy afternoon in mid-March that Dominic finally broached the subject he had been considering for weeks. "I've been thinking about your sister," he said, setting aside his laptop to watch Asha work on a vibrant abstract painting. Asha's hand stilled, the brush hovering over the canvas. "What about her?" Dominic chose his words carefully. "I've been doing some research into family reunification cases. There are programs designed to help people in your situation." Asha turned to face him, her expression guarded. "What do you mean, my situation?" "People who want to regain custody of their siblings or children, but lack the resources to navigate the system," Dominic clarified. "There are legal aid organizations that specialize in this area." Hope flickered briefly in Asha's eyes before she tamped it down. "I've tried that route. Without stable housing and income, I don't stand a chance." "You have stable housing now," Dominic pointed out, "and I could provide a letter confirming your employment." Asha set down her brush, wiping, her hands on a cloth. "Dominic, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this arrangement isn't permanent. When spring comes—" "It could be," he interrupted. "Permanent, I mean. If you wanted." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Asha stared at him, trying to read his expression. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked finally. Dominic stood and moved closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm saying that you don't have to leave when spring comes. The guest house could be yours for as long as you want it. You could continue working here or find another job if you prefer. You could have the stability you need to file for custody of Zora." Asha's heart pounded in her chest. "Why would you do that for me?" Dominic's gaze softened. "Do you really need to ask her?" The atmosphere in the studio shifted, charged with unspoken emotions. Asha was acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the way his eyes lingered on her face. "I can't accept that kind of offer," she said, taking a small step back. "It's too much." "It's not charity, if that's what you're worried about," Dominic said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. I want you here, Asha. These past weeks have been—" "What?" Asha prompted when he trailed off. Dominic ran a hand through his hair. "Different. Better. I don't want to go back to how things were before you came." The raw honesty in his voice made Asha's resolve waver. She couldn't deny that she felt the same way, that somehow, against all odds, they had found something valuable in each other's company. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Dominic nodded, respecting her need for space. "Of course. But will you at least consider meeting with a lawyer, just to understand your options regarding Zora?" Asha hesitated, then nodded. "I can do that." "Good," Dominic said, relief evident in his voice. "I've scheduled an appointment for tomorrow afternoon with Caroline Bennett. She's the best family law attorney in the city." Despite herself, Asha smiled. "You were pretty confident I'd say yes." A hint of a smile touched Dominic's lips. "I was hopeful." Their eyes met, and for a moment Asha thought he might reach for her. Instead, he took a deliberate step back. "I should let you get back to your painting," he said, moving toward the door. "Dinner at 7? "I'll be there," Asha replied, watching him go with mixed emotions swirling through her chest. When he was gone, she turned back to her canvas, but her concentration was broken. Dominic's offer played through her mind on repeat. Stay permanently. Have a real home again. Maybe even get Zora back. It was everything she had dreamed of for the past 2 years. So why did it frighten her so much? Because accepting would mean admitting how much she had come to depend on Dominic, not just for shelter and security, but for the way he made her feel, seen, valued, whole. And that was terrifying. The law office of Caroline Bennett was located in a sleek downtown building with views of the city skyline. Asha felt out of place, despite the new clothes Dominic had insisted on buying her for the occasion. A simple but elegant navy blue dress and matching blazer. Dominic had offered to accompany her to the appointment, but Asha had declined. This was something she needed to do on her own. Still, his support was evident in the way he had arranged everything, ensuring she would be taken seriously. Caroline Bennett was a slim woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She greeted Asha warmly, ushering her into a comfortable office. "Dominic Hale speaks very highly of you," she said as they sat down. "He's explained some of your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you." Over the next hour, Asha told her story. Her mother's death, losing custody of Zora, her descent into homelessness, and finally, her current situation at Dominic's estate. Caroline listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "So to be clear," the lawyer said when Asha had finished, "you currently have stable housing and employment, and you wish to petition for custody of your 16-year-old sister, who is in foster care." "Yes," Asha confirmed, her hands twisted together in her lap. "But I don't know if it's possible. The Braxtons, her foster family, they're good people. They can give her things I can't." Caroline's expression was thoughtful. "In my experience, courts are increasingly recognizing the importance of family connections, especially for older children. The fact that you're her sister, not a distant relative, works in your favor." Hope flickered in Asha's chest. "So you think there's a chance?" "I do," Caroline said. "It won't be easy, and it will take time. We'll need to establish that you have stable housing, income, and the ability to provide for Zora's needs, but it's certainly not impossible." "What about my history?" Asha asked. "The homelessness, the jobs I've lost." "We'll address that honestly," Caroline replied. "Many people have faced similar challenges, especially in recent years. What matters is where you are now and your plan for the future." By the end of the appointment, Asha felt a cautious optimism she hadn't allowed herself in years. Caroline had outlined a plan, a series of steps that would give Asha the best chance of regaining custody of her sister. "The first step," Caroline said as they wrapped up, "would be a supervised visit. Would you be comfortable with that?" Asha's heart leaped at the thought of seeing Zora again. "Yes, absolutely." "Good, I'll make the arrangements through the proper channels. It might take a week or two." When Asha left the office, she felt lighter somehow, as if a burden she had carried for years had begun to lift. She took a taxi back to Dominic's estate, her mind racing with possibilities that had seemed out of reach just hours before. Dominic was waiting for her on the terrace, a tense expression on his face that softened when he saw her smile. "It went well?" he asked as she approached. Asha nodded, unable to contain her excitement. "She thinks I have a real chance. We're going to start with a supervised visit." The relief in Dominic's eyes was palpable. "I'm glad." "Thank you," Asha said, impulsively reaching for his hand, "for all of this, for believing it was possible when I didn't." Dominic's fingers curled around hers, warm and solid. "You deserve this chance, Asha. Both you and Zora." They stood there on the terrace, hands linked, the city spread out below them like a promise of possibilities. For the first time since her mother's death, Asha allowed herself to hope for a future that included not just survival, but happiness. 2 weeks later, Asha sat nervously in a small room at the Family Services Center, waiting for Zora to arrive. Caroline had arranged the visit, explaining to the caseworker that Asha's circumstances had changed significantly. The door opened, and a tall, slender girl entered, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and hope. At 16, Zora had grown several inches since Asha had last seen her, her features maturing from child to young woman. But her eyes were the same, their mother's eyes, full of intelligence and quiet strength. "Asha?" she said, her voice wavering. Slightly, Asha stood, tears welling in her eyes. "Zora, look at you." For a moment they stood frozen, taking each other in. Then Zora crossed the room and threw her arms around her sister, clinging to her as if afraid she might disappear. "I thought you forgot about me," Zora whispered, her voice breaking. "Never," Asha said fiercely, holding her tight. "Not for a single day." The caseworker, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Reynolds, gave them some space, sitting quietly in the corner of the room as the sisters talked. Zora told Asha about her life with the Braxtons, school, friends, her interest in computer programming. Asha shared a carefully edited version of her own experiences, focusing on her current situation and her artwork. "You're living in a mansion?" Zora asked incredulously. "And you have your own art studio?" Asha nodded, smiling at her sister's wide-eyed reaction. "It's temporary," she explained. "I'm working there, helping the owner." "What's he like?" Zora asked. "Is he some creepy old rich guy?" Asha laughed, shaking her head. "No, nothing like that. He's—" She paused, searching for the right words. "He's kind, complicated. He's been through some hard times too, I think." Zora studied her sister's face. "You like him?" It wasn't a question. Asha felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends," she said carefully. Zora raised an eyebrow, looking so much like their mother that it made Asha's heart ache. "Uh-huh. Sure." The hour passed too quickly. When Ms. Reynolds gently informed them that their time was up, both sisters fought back tears. "Can I see you again?" Zora asked, clutching Asha's hands. "Yes," Asha promised. "I'm working with a lawyer now. Things are going to be different, I promise." As they hugged goodbye, Zora whispered, "I miss you. I miss us being a family." "Me too," Asha whispered back. "But we'll figure it out, somehow." Watching Zora leave was one of the hardest things Asha had ever done. She sat in the empty room for several minutes afterward, composing herself before she left the building. Outside, she was surprised to see Dominic's car parked at the curb. He stepped out when he saw her, concern etched on his face. "I thought you might want a ride home," he said simply. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought fresh tears to Asha's eyes. Without a word, she walked into his arms, burying her face against his chest as the emotions of the day overwhelmed her. Dominic held her close, one hand gently stroking her hair. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." They stayed that way for a long moment, Asha drawing strength from his solid presence. Finally, she pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed by her breakdown. "Don't be," Dominic replied, his voice gentle. "How did it go?" "It was—" Asha searched for words. "Wonderful. Heartbreaking. She's so grown up, Now Dominic guided her to the car, opening the door for her. Tell me about her. During the drive back to the estate, Asha talked about Zora, her intelligence, her resilience, the way she seemed both older and younger than her 16 years. Dominic listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. She sounds remarkable, he said as they pulled into the driveway. Like her sister. Asha glanced at him, touched by the compliment. She is, and I'm more determined than ever to give her a real home again. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. We'll make it happen. The we didn't escape Asha's notice. Somehow, in the weeks they had known each other, her struggle had become their struggle. The realization both warmed and frightened her. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Asha and Dominic sat on the terrace despite the chill in the air. Asha wrapped herself in a blanket, gazing out at the city lights. Caroline thinks I should start looking for my own apartment, she said, breaking the comfortable silence, for the custody case, to show I have independent housing. Dominic tensed, beside her. Is that what you want? Asha turned to look at him. I don't know. A few months ago it would have seemed like an impossible dream. But now... Now? Dominic prompted when she trailed off. Now it feels like settling for less than what I really want, Asha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic shifted to face her, his dark eyes intense in the dim light. And what do you really want, Asha? The question hung between them, charged with meaning. Asha felt her heart racing as she struggled to find the courage to be honest, with him and with herself. I want a real home, she said finally. Not just an apartment or a guest house. I want somewhere that feels like it's mine, where Zora and I can be a family again. Dominic nodded slowly. What else? Asha took a deep breath. I want to finish my degree, to become the art therapist I always planned to be. That's possible, Dominic said. All of it. There's more, Asha said, her voice growing steadier as she continued. I want to stop being afraid of trusting people, of letting myself be happy, of... She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. Of feeling what I feel for you. Dominic went very still. And what do you feel for me? Instead of answering with words, Asha leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was soft, hesitant, a question more than a statement. For a heartbeat, Dominic didn't respond, and Asha began to pull back, mortified. But then his hand came up to cradle her face, and he was kissing her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally separated, Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he confessed. Why didn't you? Asha asked, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. I was afraid you'd think, I expected it, that I was helping you because I wanted this. Asha pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. Is that why you helped me? Because you were attracted to me? No, Dominic said firmly. That first night, I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Everything after that was because I saw who you really are. Strong, talented, kind, despite everything you've been through. I fell for the woman who cooks her mother's recipes when she's sad, who pours her soul onto canvas, who never gave up on her sister even when the world told her to. His words washed over Asha like a warm tide, filling spaces inside her that had been empty for so long. She kissed him again, deeper this time, letting her actions speak the feelings she wasn't quite ready to put into words. Later, as they sat, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, Dominic made a suggestion that caught Asha by surprise. Move into the main house, he said, his voice rumbling against her ear, where her head rested on his chest. The guest house could be for Zora. When the time comes, it would give her privacy, her own space, but you'd still be close. Asha lifted her head to look at him. You've thought about this. I've thought about little else, Dominic admitted. I want you here, Asha, not as my employee, as my partner. The word partner sent a thrill through Asha's body. It's happening so fast, she said. Is it? Dominic asked. Sometimes I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to find you. The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. Still, caution made her hesitate. What if it doesn't work out? What if we're rushing into something because we're both lonely? Dominic considered her questions seriously. I was lonely before you came, he acknowledged. But that's not why I want you to stay. I want you to stay because when you're here, this house feels like a home. Because you challenge me to be better. Because the thought of waking up and not seeing you makes the day seem pointless. He took her hand, tracing patterns on her palm, with his thumb. We don't have to rush anything. Move into the main house, let's see where this goes. If it doesn't work out, the guest house is still yours for as long as you need it. No strings attached. Asha weighed his words, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She found none, only openness, vulnerability, and a hope that mirrored her own. Okay, she said finally. I'll move into the main house. Dominic's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her close, sealing their agreement with a kiss that promised more than words ever could. The following weeks brought a flurry of changes. Asha moved her few belongings into the master suite, which she and Dominic now shared. With his encouragement, she enrolled in online courses to complete her degree in art therapy. Caroline continued to work on the custody case, reporting steady progress. Most significantly, Asha's visits with Zora became regular occurrences. Twice a week they would meet, sometimes at the Family Services Center, sometimes for supervised outings to museums or parks. Dominic kept his distance during these visits, understanding that the sisters needed time to rebuild their relationship, without outside complications, but he was always there afterward, ready to listen as Asha processed her emotions. By early April, the custody case had advanced enough that Caroline suggested a more significant step, having Zora visit the estate. It would be good for the judge to see that you have appropriate housing for a teenager, she explained, during a meeting with Asha and Dominic. And it would give Zora a chance to get comfortable with the idea of potentially living here. The day of the visit arrived with clear skies and blooming flowers throughout the garden. Asha had spent hours preparing the guest house, setting up a bedroom that she hoped would appeal to a 16-year-old. Plenty of pillows, fairy lights, a desk for schoolwork, and wall space for posters or photos. She was a bundle of nerves as she and Dominic waited for the caseworker's car to arrive. Dominic squeezed her hand reassuringly. She's going to love it, he said. How could she not? When Zora stepped out of the car, her eyes widened at the sight of the mansion. Whoa, she said, turning to Asha. You weren't kidding. Asha laughed, some of her tension easing at her sister's typical teenage response. Wait until you see inside. The tour of the estate went better than Asha could have hoped. Zora was appropriately impressed by the main house, but truly lit up when she saw the guest house. This would be all mine, she asked, running her hand over the desk. If the court approves, Asha confirmed, you'd have your own space, but I'd be right there in the main house. Zora turned to Dominic, who had been quiet for most of the tour. And you're okay with this, having some random teenager living on your property? Dominic met her direct gaze with equal frankness. You're not random, Zora, you're Asha's sister. That makes you important to me, too. Zora studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if she'd come to a decision. Cool. So are you guys, together now? Asha felt her cheeks warm. Yes. Zora grinned. About time you found someone decent, sis. The caseworker, who had been observing the interactions with a professional eye, seemed pleased by what she saw. As they walked through the garden after lunch, she pulled Asha aside. This is quite a change from your situation 6 months ago, she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. I know it must seem sudden, Asha acknowledged, but it's real. Dominic has given me a chance to rebuild my life, to be the sister Zora deserves. The caseworker nodded thoughtfully. Zora talks about you all the time, you know, even during the months when you were struggling. She never lost faith that you'd find your way back to her. Tears pricked at Asha's eyes. I never stopped trying. I can see that now, the caseworker said. I'll be including a positive report in your file. The judge will make the final decision, of course, but from what I've seen today, you've created a safe, stable environment for Zora. When it was time for Zora to leave, the sisters hugged tightly, both reluctant to let go. Soon, Asha promised. We'll be together soon. Watching the car drive away, Asha felt Dominic's arm slip around her waist. "She's amazing," he said. "Just like her big sister." Asha leaned into his embrace, grateful for his steady presence. "Do you think it went well?" "I think it went perfectly," Dominic assured her. "The caseworker was impressed. Caroline will make sure the report gets to the judge. We're getting closer, Asha. We." The word still made her heart swell. Somehow, against all odds, she had found not just shelter but a partner, someone who stood beside her as she fought to rebuild her family. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Asha finally found the courage to say the words that had been growing in her heart. "I love you," she whispered, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Dominic's arms tightened around her. "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I knew I could love anyone." Outside, spring had fully arrived, transforming the garden from winter's barrenness to vibrant life. Inside, in the warmth of Dominic's embrace, Asha felt her own transformation continuing, from someone barely surviving to someone truly living, loving and hoping again. The journey wasn't over. There would be more hurdles to overcome, more paperwork to file, more court dates to attend. But for the first time in years, Asha wasn't facing these challenges alone. She had Dominic by her side, and the promise of Zora returning to her life. As she drifted towards sleep, Asha sent a silent thank you to whatever fate or chance had led her to Dominic's gate on that freezing January night. What had begun as a desperate search for shelter had become so much more. A journey toward healing, wholeness, and a love she had never expected to find. Spring had fully blossomed in Atlanta by late April, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to mirror the changes in Asha's life. The once bare trees around Dominic's estate now burst with green leaves and delicate flowers, the garden alive with color and fragrance. Inside the mansion, similar transformations had taken place. Rooms that had once been cold and impersonal now felt lived in and warm. Asha's artwork hung on walls throughout the house, bringing splashes of color and emotion to spaces that had previously been stark and minimalist. But the most significant change was less visible. The shift in both Asha and Dominic, as they learned to open themselves to love and trust after years of isolation. They were having breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the morning sunshine, when Asha's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately sat up straighter. "It's Caroline," she said, her voice tight with anticipation as she answered the call. Dominic watched her face carefully, trying to read her expression as she listened to the lawyer. His own heart was pounding. They had been waiting for news about the custody hearing for weeks. "Yes," Asha was saying. "I understand. Tomorrow at 10. We'll be there." She ended the call and looked up at Dominic, her eyes wide. "The judge wants to see us tomorrow. All of us, me, Zora, the Braxtons, the caseworker. That's good, right?" Dominic asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It means they're taking your petition seriously." Asha nodded, though her expression remained worried. "Caroline says it's unusual for the judge to request this kind of meeting before making a decision. She's not sure what it means." Dominic squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Later that afternoon, as Asha was organizing her portfolio for the meeting, documentation of her stable housing, her renewed college enrollment, her work in the art studio, she found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the guest house that she hoped would soon be Zora's home. Dominic found her there, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Asha leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if the judge decides Zora is better off with the Braxtons? They're good people, stable. I'm just her sister who disappeared for months, who couldn't even take care of herself." "That's not who you are," Dominic said firmly. "You're the woman who never stopped fighting for her sister, even when everything was against you. The woman who slept on church steps rather than give up. The woman who is rebuilding her life piece by piece through sheer determination." He turned her gently to face him. "That's who the judge will see tomorrow, and that's who Zora already sees when she looks at you." Asha's eyes filled with tears. "How did I get so lucky, finding you that night?" Dominic brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I'm the lucky one. You brought life back to this house, to me." They stood together by the window as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden. Whatever tomorrow would bring, they would face it together. The family court was housed in a modern building downtown, its atmosphere more businesslike than Asha had expected. She and Dominic arrived early, meeting Caroline in the lobby. The lawyer looked confident in her tailored suit, which helped calm Asha's nerves slightly. "Remember," Caroline said as they waited, "Judge Porter is fair but direct. Answer her questions. Honestly, don't try to sugarcoat your past difficulties, but focus on the positive changes and your plans for the future." Asha nodded, smoothing down her simple navy dress for the 10th time. Dominic had offered to buy her something new for the occasion, but she had declined. This dress, the one she had worn to her first meeting with Caroline, felt like a good luck charm. The Braxtons arrived next, a kind-looking couple in their 50s who greeted Asha with genuine warmth. Mrs. Braxton pulled her aside while the others were talking. "Zora loves you very much," she said quietly. "Whatever happens today, you should know that she never stopped believing in you." Asha blinked back tears, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't." "Mrs." Braxton squeezed her hand. "You're her family, that matters." Before Asha could respond, the caseworker arrived with Zora. The teenager looked nervous but managed a small smile when she saw her sister. They weren't allowed to speak before the meeting, but Asha tried to convey her love and support through her eyes. At precisely 10 o'clock, they were led into a conference room rather than a courtroom. Judge Porter, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, sat at the head of a large table. She gestured for everyone to take seats around the table. "This is not a formal hearing," she explained once everyone was settled. "I've reviewed the case file thoroughly, including Ms. Bennett's petition, the home study reports, and the statements from all parties. I have some questions before making my decision." Asha felt Dominic's hand find hers under the table, offering silent support. The judge turned her attention to Asha. "Miss Monroe, your petition for custody of your sister represents quite a remarkable turnaround in circumstances. 6 months ago, you were homeless. Now you're living in a multi-million-dollar estate, returning to college, and claiming you can provide a stable home for a teenager. That's quite a change in a short time." Asha took a deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor, it is. I won't pretend that my life hasn't changed dramatically since meeting Dominic. But what hasn't changed is my love for my sister and my determination to be there for her." "Tell me about the time when you couldn't be there for her," the judge said, her expression unreadable. "After your mother died." This was the question Asha had dreaded, the acknowledgement of her failure. But Caroline had prepared her to be honest. "After our mother died, I tried to do everything at once," Asha explained, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Work multiple jobs, stay in school, fight for custody of Zora. I thought if I just worked hard enough, I could keep our family together. But I couldn't. The medical bills piled up. I lost my apartment, then my jobs. Eventually, I lost everything, including contact with your sister," Judge Porter noted. Asha nodded, pain evident in her eyes. "There were months when I couldn't even call her because my phone was shut off. When I was living in my car, I was ashamed for her to see me like that." "Yet now you believe you can provide stability?" "I do," Asha said with quiet confidence. "With Dominic's support, I have a safe home, the means to continue my education, and most importantly, the emotional capacity to be the sister Zora deserves." The judge turned her attention to Dominic. "Mr. Hale, you've provided statements supporting Ms. Monroe's petition. What is your relationship exactly?" Dominic sat up straighter. "Asha and I are partners, Your Honor. We share a home and a life." "And if that were to change," the judge asked bluntly, "if your relationship ended, what would happen to Zora's living situation?" It was a fair question, one that Asha and Dominic had discussed extensively with Caroline. Dominic answered without hesitation. "The guest house on my property would remain Asha and Zora's home, regardless of our personal relationship. I've had legal documents drawn up ensuring this, which Ms. Bennett has submitted to the court." Judge Porter nodded, making a note. She then turned to Zora. her expression softening slightly. "Zora, you're 16 now. The court gives significant weight to the preferences of older minors. The Braxtons have provided you with a stable home for 2 years. Why do you want to leave? That to live with your sister?" Zora straightened in her chair, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "The Braxtons are good people, and I'm grateful for everything they've done for me. But Asha is my family. She's all I have left of our mom." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Even when she was struggling, I knew she was fighting to get back to me. Now that she has a chance at a real life again, I want to be part of it. I want us to be a family again." The judge asked several more questions. Of the Braxtons, who spoke kindly of Zora's bond with her sister, of the caseworker, who confirmed the positive home study results, and finally, back to Asha. "Ms. Monroe, what do you see as the greatest challenge you'll face if custody is granted to you?" Asha considered the question carefully. "I think the greatest challenge will be patience, understanding that rebuilding our relationship will take time. Zora and I have both changed. We've been through difficult experiences apart from each other. Learning to be sisters again, to trust each other again, won't happen overnight." Something in the judge's expression shifted, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "That's a surprisingly insightful answer." She closed the file in front of her and looked around the table. "I've heard enough to make my decision, but before I do, I want to speak with Zora alone." Everyone except the teenager was asked to wait outside. The minutes stretched endlessly as Asha paced the hallway, too nervous to sit. Dominic stood beside her, a steady presence in the storm of her emotions. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they were called back in. Zora was sitting with a small smile on her face, which gave Asha a flicker of hope. Judge Porter waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "Family court cases are rarely simple, and this one is no exception. We have a minor who lost her mother, a sister who lost everything trying to keep her family together, and foster parents who have provided stability during a difficult time." She turned to the Braxtons. "Mr. and Mrs. Braxton, your service as foster parents has been exemplary. You opened your home to Zora when she needed it most, and you've continued to support her emotional well-being, including her connection to her sister. The court thanks you." Next, she addressed Asha. "Ms. Monroe, your journey has been remarkable. While your circumstances have changed dramatically in a short time, what impresses me most is your recognition that rebuilding your relationship with your sister will take time and patience." Finally, she looked at Zora. "Young lady, you've shown maturity beyond your years in expressing your wishes and understanding the complex situation your family has faced." Judge Porter folded her hands on the table. "After careful consideration, I am granting Asha Monroe's petition for custody of her sister, Zora Monroe, effective immediately." Asha gasped, tears springing to her eyes as the judge continued. "However, I am implementing a 3-month transition period. During this time, Zora will spend weekdays with her sister and weekends with the Braxtons, gradually shifting to full-time residence with Ms. Monroe by the end of July. This will allow for a smoother adjustment for everyone involved." Asha could hardly believe what she was hearing. After 2 years of separation, of fighting against seemingly impossible odds, she and Zora would be a family again. The judge stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Ms. Bennett, please prepare the necessary paperwork. We'll have a follow-up review in 3 months to ensure the transition is proceeding smoothly." As everyone filed out of the conference room, Zora broke protocol and rushed to her sister, throwing her arms around her. Asha held her tight, tears streaming down both their faces. "We did it," Zora whispered. "We're going to be together again." Over her sister's shoulder, Asha's eyes met Dominic's. The emotion in his face, pride, joy, love, was almost too much to bear. He had made this possible, had believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. Outside the courthouse, after goodbyes had been said to the Braxtons and the caseworker, Dominic suggested lunch to celebrate. But Asha had another idea. "There's somewhere I'd like to go first," she said. "Something I want to show both of you." The Rainbow Center stood in South Atlanta, its brick facade weathered but still solid. Construction equipment surrounded the building, and a large sign announced, "Coming soon, Rainbow Community Arts and Education Center, a Hale Properties restoration project." Zora stared at the building, then at the sign, then at Dominic. "You're fixing it up? The old art center?" Dominic nodded, his eyes on Asha. "It was important to someone I love." Asha took his hand, squeezing it tightly. She had been stunned when Dominic told her about his decision to restore the center rather than replace it with luxury condos. It was the first project in a new direction for his company, one focused on community revitalization rather than just profit. "I used to take classes here too," Zora said, excitement in her voice. "Remember, Asha, Mom would drop us both off on Saturdays." "Remember," Asha said softly. "That's why I wanted to come here today, to remind us that even when things seem lost, they can be rebuilt, made better than before." Dominic unlocked the fence surrounding the property, leading them inside. The interior of the building was still under construction, but the potential was clear. Large, light-filled spaces that would soon host art classes, job training programs, and community events. "The second floor will have temporary housing units," Dominic explained as they explored, "for people getting back on their feet, and there will be a dedicated art therapy program." He glanced at Asha. "We'll need a qualified therapist to run it once you finish your degree." Asha's heart swelled at the thought, not just rebuilding her own life and family, but helping others who were struggling as she once had. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As they continued the tour, Zora peppered Dominic with questions about the renovation, her initial shyness around him fading as they discussed the project. Watching them together, Asha felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place after being scattered for so long. Later, over lunch at a nearby cafe, Zora asked the question that had been on her mind. "So, when are you two getting married, Asha?" Choked on her water, while Dominic looked equally startled. "We haven't really discussed that," Asha said, feeling her cheeks warm. Zora rolled her eyes in typical teenage fashion. "Well, you should. You're obviously perfect for each other." Dominic caught Asha's eye across the table, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your sister makes a good point." "Does she now?" Asha replied, trying to sound casual despite the flutter in her chest. "Definitely," Dominic said, his expression growing more serious. "In fact, I've been thinking about it a lot lately." Zora's eyes widened. "Are you about to propose? Right now? Because that would be so romantic." Dominic laughed, breaking the tension. "Not right this minute. When I propose to your sister, I want it to be special, perfect. When, not if," Asha noted, her heart racing at the implication. Dominic reached across the table to take her hand. "Definitely when." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Asha and Dominic prepared for Zora's arrival. The guest house was furnished with everything a teenager could want, with Zora offering input via daily text messages and video calls. True to the judge's order, Zora began staying with them during the week, returning to the Braxtons' home on weekends. The arrangement worked well, giving everyone time to adjust to the new normal. For Asha, having her sister back in her life was both wonderful and challenging. Zora was no longer the 14-year-old she remembered. She was a young woman with opinions, habits, and occasionally an attitude that left Asha scrambling to find her footing as both sister and guardian. Dominic proved to be an unexpected source of stability during this transition. He gave the sisters space to reconnect, but offered support when needed, helping Zora with her math homework, driving her to school when Asha had early classes at the college, simply listening when either of them needed to talk. One evening in June, after Zora had returned to the Braxtons for the weekend, Asha found Dominic in his home office, reviewing plans for the Rainbow Center renovation. "You're amazing with her, you know," Asha said, leaning against the doorframe. "With Zora, she adores you." Dominic looked up with a smile. "She makes it easy. She's a great kid." "I was so worried about how all this would work, you, me, Zora living together, but it feels right," Dominic finished for her. "It feels right." Asha nodded, crossing the room to perch on the edge of his desk. "It does. Like we're becoming a family. Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. A decision being made. He stood up, taking her hands in his. "I was going to wait, to plan something elaborate," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But I don't want to wait anymore." Asha's heart began to race as Dominic lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Asha Monroe," he said, looking up at her with eyes full of love, "you came to my gate on the coldest night of the year, and somehow you melted the ice around my heart. You've brought warmth and life and color to my world. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatiously large, but exquisitely designed, with a diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires that matched the blue in Asha's paintings. "Will you marry me?" Dominic asked, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Will you make this house a home with me, permanently?" Tears blurred Asha's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally separated, Asha laughed softly. "Zora is going to be insufferable when she finds out she was right about us." Dominic grinned. "She's a smart kid, takes after her sister." They spent the evening planning how to tell Zora about their engagement, eventually deciding to wait until she returned on Monday, rather than calling her at the Braxtons. As they lay in bed that night, Asha held her hand up, watching how the ring caught the moonlight streaming through the windows. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that this would be my life now," she mused, "I would have said they were crazy." Dominic pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones we never see coming." By mid-July, as the transition period ordered by the judge neared its end, Zora was spending only every other weekend with the Braxtons. The three of them, Asha, Dominic, and Zora, had fallen into a comfortable routine that felt increasingly like family. The Rainbow Center renovation was progressing rapidly, with a grand reopening scheduled for September. Asha had been deeply involved in planning the art therapy spaces, drawing on her renewed studies and personal experience to create environments that would welcome and heal. One warm evening, Dominic suggested a drive. "There's something I want to show both of you," he said mysteriously. He drove them to a neighborhood not far from where Asha and Zora had grown up, a quiet street lined with modest but well-maintained homes. He pulled up in front of a small blue house with a front porch and a garden full of blooming flowers. "What are we doing here?" Asha asked, confused. Dominic smiled. Getting out of the car, they followed him up the walkway. To Asha's surprise, he pulled out a key and unlocked the front door. "Dominic," she said slowly, "whose house is this? Why don't you look around and see if you recognize it?" he suggested, ushering them inside. The interior was freshly painted but otherwise empty of furniture. Asha wandered through the rooms, a strange sense of familiarity growing with each step. When she reached the kitchen, she stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. This can't be—" "What?" Zora asked, looking around in confusion. "What is it?" "This is our house," Asha whispered. "The house we grew up in, where we lived with Mom." Zora's eyes widened. "Are you serious? It looks so different." "It was foreclosed on after your mother passed away," Dominic explained, coming to stand beside them. "It changed hands a few times, fell into disrepair. My company bought it as part of a neighborhood revitalization project." He turned to Asha, taking her hands in his. "I had it renovated. The deed is in your name." Asha stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "You bought our childhood home for me?" Dominic nodded. "For both of you. I know how much you love living at the estate, and that won't change. We'll still live there together. But I thought you might want to keep this place too, as a connection to your mother, to your past." "We could rent it to a family who needs it," Zora suggested, already catching on to the possibility. "Like Mom used to talk about doing if she ever had extra money. Or use it as additional transitional housing for the Rainbow Center program," Asha added, her mind racing with possibilities. Dominic smiled, pleased by their reactions. It's yours to decide. I just thought you might want to know where home was for both of you. The words triggered something in Asha's memory, a line from the story premise she'd read months ago. She looked at Dominic in wonder, realizing how much thought he had put into this gesture. Tears filled her eyes as the full weight of his gift hit her. This wasn't just a house. It was a piece of her history, a connection to her mother, a legacy she could now preserve for Zora. I don't know what to say, she managed, her voice choked with emotion. You don't have to say anything, Dominic replied, echoing words he had spoken months ago in the art studio. But Asha found she did have words, important ones that needed to be said. She moved into his arms, leaning her forehead against his chest. I was never looking for shelter, she whispered. I just didn't think anyone would see me long enough to offer it. Dominic's arms tightened around her. I didn't offer it, he replied, softly. You gave it to me first. Zora watched them with a smile, then wandered into the next room, giving them a moment of privacy. In the quiet of the kitchen where she had once helped her mother prepare meals, Asha looked up at the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. I love you, she said simply. Not for what you've given me, but for how. You've seen me, even when I was at my worst, even when I had nothing. You never had nothing, Asha, Dominic said, brushing a tear from her cheek. You had dignity, strength, a heart capable of so much love. Those are the things that made me fall in love with you. As the summer sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows of the little blue house, Asha felt the pieces of her life coming full circle, from homelessness to home, from isolation to family, from survival to love. The journey had been long and painful, with more obstacles than she could have overcome alone. But she hadn't been alone, not really. Her mother's love had sustained her through the darkest times. Zora's faith in her had never wavered, and Dominic had seen her true worth when she herself had forgotten it. Together, they walked through the rooms of the house, Zora pointing out where things used to be, Asha sharing memories of their mother. Dominic listened, learning the history of the women he had come to love, becoming part of their story even as they became part of his. Later that night, back at the estate they now all called home, Asha stood on the terrace looking out at the city lights. Dominic joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Happy? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Asha leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the security that came not from his wealth, but from his heart. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. Below them, the lights of Atlanta twinkled like stars, including those in the neighborhood where a small blue house now stood, as a testament to the past and a promise for the future. Life had taken Asha on a journey she could never have predicted, from the concrete steps of a church to the arms of a man who had seen her soul when she was at her lowest. She had found more than shelter. She had found her way home. The end.